This video lecture is going to be in support of Chapter 8 from our book, The Theory of Linear Structure. So in this chapter, we really get into the guts of making meaning, making story through visual and audio sequences. So the first bit of wording that we have to get down is the notion of what's the basic unit, and the basic unit that we discuss is called the shot. It's the shot that is edited from shot to shot to shot that can make up something we might call either a sequence or a whole scene. But the shot is the basic unit, and usually we're talking about a film or a video shot, so it's usually motion film or motion video with audio. So once we get that understanding, the magic of film storytelling and that stuff that's going on, I said, in people's imagination occurs in the relationships between shots. Now, this is a very important point, is that editors will tell you the shots themselves have meaning and have importance, and the videographer or the filmmaker or the director of photography, the director, and all the people who are working in the production part of this try really hard to make that shot and what goes on inside that shot really work. But editors and even directors will admit that the real magic happens in between shots, because it's the leap between shots, the relationship between shots, where you can create illusions, where you create relationships between things, where you allow the viewer's imagination to make the sense between those two shots. And it's important to remember, the most important mind in a film experience is the mind of the viewer, that the viewer's imagination and mind and ability to put two shots together is where much of the richness of a film is lies. So we can talk about four relationships or four aspects in relationships between shots, right? The first two are the two that I want to focus on. There are content relationships, what happens in this shot compared to what happens in that shot. There are also formal relationships, relating the forms, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Then there's simply the ordering of shots. What happens first? What happens next? What's the next thing? And then there's the duration of the shots. Oh, it lasted this long, or it lasted that long. It's number 1 and 2 where I want to focus next, because those are the most interesting and important here. So content relationships are the relationship between shots, between what is in the shot in terms of meaning. So if there's a young girl in one shot, and then there's the next shot, and there's a crusty old man, and then in the third shot, the two of them are riding on horses out over a dusty prairie. The jumps in those shots and the viewer's sense-making of connecting those shots is strongly at play. So that's content relationships. There are also formal relationships. So that's the compare or contrast in movement or space or pace or tone or atmospherics or some other basic visual or physical quality. And this is also an equally important area for editors. There's a classic scene from 2001: Space Odyssey in which a kind of precursor to humans, kind of ape guy, throws a big bone that he's just beaten up another ape with into the sky, and as it twists and turns and falls down, there's a cut to an object that is almost the same size and shape, and we discover that that object is a futuristic spacecraft flying through space. And so the connection there is a formal connection. The shapes are the same. And you see this frequently in movies, how things of similar colors or things of similar shape or similar movement or whatever, you cut between those two, and they can give a very rich meaning and sort of a subtext based on that. So now looking at those relationships, what developed early on in filmmaking is what we now refer to as continuity style or the continuity system. And it's very interesting. Some folks use the word style to suggest that it's an aesthetic, which it is. And some folks refer to it as a system, which suggests that it's a unified, standardized approach to communicating and making a film, which it is as well. This continuity style, sometimes it's called Hollywood continuity style or Hollywood continuity system. This developed as a result early on in filmmaking, when filmmaking was single camera, meaning it was too expensive to have multiple cameras running at the same time, and it was also logistically kind of impractical. And so whole complicated narrative films were made with a single camera, but set up in different shots in different locations. And what was discovered early on were all the ways you could connect different camera shots and angles and actions if you followed some really important rules. And those rules became the continuity style, the continuity system. And those rules are always being sort of tested and played with, especially by contemporary filmmakers. But there's a lexicon of a set of rules that are really useful, and film students learn them, and it's really delightful once you see them in operation and you use them to create your own sort of illusions of continuity. So one of the earliest ones was the notion of parallel action, that if you intercut between two actions, especially if there was some logical connection between it. In this case, a building is on fire, and you intercut to these firemen rushing out of the firehouse, and you would connect, the viewer would connect in their minds without even having to be prompted, that the firemen are rushing to that building, which is on fire, and it creates some tension. Will the firemen get there on time? Will the fire wind up consuming the people, and so on? So this was one of the earliest uses of the edit, and one of the earliest sort of discoveries of continuity style. Another one is the match cut, a very, very common one, and that is that if you see one image and the subject is doing something in that image, you can cut to a very radically different angle, radically different shot size, but if it matches the action of what that viewer and the location of what that viewer was doing, our minds, the viewer's minds, will say, oh, great, this is all continuous action. So much of contemporary filmmaking is filled with match cuts. Another way that continuity can be established is through shot size sequencing, and there are many ways to sequence shots. That means what you take a wide shot here or a close up there. There are lots of ways, but they seem to boil down to two ways primarily. And your book refers to them as deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning, in terms of shot size sequencing, is a really conventional way of shooting a scene, right? You start out with the wide shot. So you start out with the general sort of premise, setting the location. Here it's Gone with the Wind, and you can see the kid running down the road and so on. And then you cut to a medium shot, and here are three young people in a garden having a conversation, and then you cut to a close-up, and here's our main character talking and responding to these young men who are talking to her. So we go wide to medium to close-up, right? And that sort of follows kind of like the rules of logic. You make a general statement, you get more specific, and then you get quite specific. So that's why it's called deductive reasoning. But another way that works equally well, you can see, is what is called in the book inductive reasoning, where you see a sequence of medium or close-up shots, and by sort of connecting them together, connecting the dots in your imagination as the viewer, you surmise, there's MUSIC, and there's a handing a ticket, and then a guy's back who's shuffling through a group of seated people. He must be going to a music hall. And then at some point you might even get a wide shot that establishes that. Hitchcock was very good at this. And then even contemporary filmmakers may use a variety of these. They'll use some deductive sorts of reasoning shot sequences and some inductive shot sequences. And there are more variations on this, but these wind up becoming the two main sort of branches. So I want to give you a quick short list, an example of a few of the continuity techniques. I've shown you already the match shot, and I've shown you shot sequencing and so on. Here are a few more. Eyeline match. So eyeline match means between two shots, there's a relationship. You see somebody looking, and then in the next shot, you connect with the first person's looking, that, oh, this is what they are looking at. Also, when it's two people in two different shots, if one is looking left, the next shot, if one is looking right, you will make the connection that they're looking at each other. So terribly important. This is from Rear Window. Jimmy Stewart is looking through binoculars, and we see what he is looking at. So that's called eyeline match. Another powerful one, and this is more of a formal aspect to formal device for continuity, is screen direction. The people are running down the stairs from left to right, and then there's a close-up shot of a man who's on the stairs guarding his head, and the stairs are also in the same direction, and then there's a cut, and the soldiers are shooting down the stairs from left to right, and you see this consistency in screen direction. There's actually more to it than this, in fact. There is a rule, and it's identified as a rule. It's called the 180-degree rule. And the idea is that the first establishing shot in a scene sets up a relationship between usually people in a scene, and those people need to stay on the sides of the screen that they appear in that establishing shot, or that there's an axis essentially running through those two people, and the camera has to stay on that side of the axis. And you'll see this is very classic. It's referred to as establishing shot, shot, reverse shot. So you can see in this classic shot with the couple sitting at the table, and then we cut to Cary Grant's character, and he is on the left-hand side looking to the right, and then we cut to the female figure, and she is on the right looking to the left. And that will stay consistent throughout that scene, unless something happens, camera movement or whatever, to help us reestablish a different line of axis. So those are some continuity. Now, one big other subset, one other big mechanism to sequencing shots in a film is completely different than continuity. In fact, you might say it's the opposite, the complementary opposite, and we call that montage. So there's continuity and there's montage, and these represent two of the big modes of assembling shots together. So montage is everything that continuity isn't. Montage means juxtaposing different kinds of images and sounds. And montage can do some things that is pretty extraordinary. So montage, you see it when a filmmaker is trying to expand time, to hold a moment, either a wonderful moment or a terrifying moment, to examine it from many angles, to replay it or to slow down. And the classic example, of course, is the Hitchcock shower scene, where there were tens and tens and tens and tens of shots all assembled to make this one short moment in the film. And it's a really classic, extraordinary moment in the film, in fact. Montage also can do things like it can suggest passage of time, or jumping through many minutes or through years or events or stages of life. And it can also be used to create kind of a texture or an atmosphere of an event, or just through a cascade of images. The classic Rocky montage, Rocky 1, where he's training with that very dramatic music. A lot of music video is this kind of montage. Important to note, montage and continuity in contemporary films exist simultaneously, and modern filmmakers avail themselves of both. That's chapter 8.